Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine.
To discover is to see something where nothing was seen. The computation-intensive problems that I discovered how to solve in the 1980s and how to solve them across a new internet, that's a global network of processors, were called grand challenges of supercomputing. They were called grand challenges because it was impossible to solve them and, for instance, to execute an extreme scale general circulation model used to foresee otherwise unforeseeable global warming and foresee it across a massively parallel processing supercomputer. They were called grand challenges because no supercomputer scientist knew how to solve the most computation-intensive problems of physics, calculus, and algebra. They were called grand challenges because no supercomputer scientist could solve them with a 64 binary thousand-fold increase in supercomputing speed. They were called grand challenges because the then state-of-the-art technology called vector processing was not contributing much to the speed of supercomputers. They were called grand challenges because parallel processing, that was the hoped-for solution, was considered a huge waste of everybody's time. In the 1970s and 80s, trying to discover a factor of 64 binary thousand increase in computing speed of a massively parallel processing supercomputer that was powered by 64 binary thousand processors was like trying to make the parallel processing machine do the impossible. The mood of the decades of the 1970s and 80s was summed up in an article in the June 14, 1976 issue of the Computer World magazine. The Computer World was the flagship publication of the world of computing. That article in the Computer World magazine was captioned, quote, "Research in parallel processing questioned as waste of time," unquote. 14 years after that article in Computer World, the June 1990 issue of the Siam News, the flagship bi-monthly news journal of record of mathematicians, carried a cover story that described how I, Philip Emeagwali, experimentally discovered how to save time by massively parallel processing extreme scale computations and processing them across 64 binary thousand processors. I experimentally discovered a paradigm-shifting speed increase in massively parallel supercomputing that was a factor of 64 binary thousand times faster than what was believed to be possible. I experimentally discovered how to save time by massively parallel processing 64 binary thousand initial boundary value problems of modern mathematics and computational physics. I experimentally discovered how to email and solve those problems, and solve them through a new internet that I visualized and theorized and programmed as my global network of 64 binary thousand commodity off-the-shelf processors. My experimental discovery of how to reduce 64 binary thousand days or 180 years of time to solution on only one processor to only 1 day of supercomputing across 64 binary thousand processors was copied by Chinese supercomputer manufacturers. Chinese supercomputer scientists used my experimental discovery of massively parallel processing to solve initial boundary value problems arising in extreme scale computational physics that would have taken 30,000 years to solve on only one processor. Chinese supercomputer scientists can now solve the same mathematical problem in 1 day and solve them across a network of 10,649,600 commodity off-the-shelf processors. On the 4th of July of 1989, massively parallel processing supercomputing conflicted with the established truth, namely vector processing supercomputing. I was personally and professionally attacked by supercomputer scientists that opposed the radical idea of simultaneously solving 65,536 problems at once or in parallel and across 65,536 processors instead of solving only one problem at a time or in sequence on only one processor that is not a member of an ensemble of processors. For those reasons, my experimental discovery was dismissed as a mistake and was rejected by the supercomputer community. The experimental evidence that the massively parallel processing supercomputer works was slow to come at first, but eventually my experimental discovery that occurred on the 4th of July of 1989 convinced the naysayers that parallel processing works. The experimental discovery of the massively parallel processing supercomputer, mocked and contested as it was a paradigm-shifting moment in our understanding of what makes computers faster and makes supercomputers fastest. The paradigm shift was from computing and communicating in the singular sense to computing and communicating in the plural senses, and to computing and communicating across a new internet that was defined and outlined by a plurality of commodity off-the-shelf processors and email wires. Parallel processing, once the stone that was rejected as rough and unsightly, is now at the foundation of modern computer science.
insightful and brilliant lecture.